Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hokyoji's Sunday Dharma Talk. And as most of you know, my name is Myo-on. And this morning I'm happy to introduce Dokai, who's the guiding teacher at Hokyoji. And this morning, he's joining us from Kansas City, where he's been assisting his sister in selling her home and wrapping up affairs relating to that. So this morning, Dokai's topic will be spring and autumn. And as I've heard Dokai say, carry on, Dokai-san.
Yeah.
And Mary, would you put your mute on, please?
Well, good morning, everyone. Just checking out. Can you hear me okay? Thumbs up? Okay, great.
Okay, 1 second. Myo-on, can you put Dokai on speaker view?
Oh,
Recording.
it is recording, and how do I?
So that's all I'll say about that. So when I'm giving this talk today about spring, autumn, and also I'm just going to speak from a paragraph from a chapter that Dogen wrote, a fascicle, in the Shobogenzo, and he calls it spring and autumn. And there's going to be another couple of paragraphs, excerpts that I'll read from another chapter called Life and Death. We'll study those for a little bit today, 15-20 minutes or so. Some of what I think is most valuable for people and myself in Dharma talks or a kind of a chosan is the reflections that we have afterwards that we share with each other. So hopefully I can say something in the next 20 minutes that provokes some thoughts for you, and we can openly share. It's gonna be a relatively short talk as long as I can keep myself under control. So that's my idea. So please, as I'm talking today, I'd like to ask you to consider a couple things. What does spring and autumn mean to you? Likewise, what does life and death mean? I'm not asking you to consider a philosophical explanation. It's just like when you say something like, ah, it feels like spring is here. What's that about inside? What are you feeling in your body? And even more so, what happened before you actually said that? What was happening? The same with life or birth. What's birth when you say, oh, something was born? What's that like? And what was happening the moment before you actually conceptualized it? And the same with autumn, and the same with death. So here's the way Dogen starts his chapter, his classical on spring and autumn. Great Master Dongshan was once asked by a monk, when cold or heat comes, how can we avoid it? The master said, why don't you go where there is no cold or heat? The monk said, what do you mean by where there is no cold or heat? The master said, when it is cold, cold finishes the monk. When it is hot, heat totals the monk. Let's just say the person. I'd like to examine this. Well, I'm going to say one of the next sentences Dogen says is, we should examine in detail this person's question. So that's what I'd like to do a little bit today. First off, I'm just going to talk a little bit my thoughts about cold and heat. For one thing, let's just go back or think, reflect about people 50, only 50 or 60 or 70 years ago, not like 200 or 300 or 500 or 1,000 years ago, only 50 or 60 or 70 years ago, when AC and central heating was not a given by maybe the majority of people. I went to high school, I didn't have air conditioning. Probably a lot of you had the same experience. And now it's almost universal. I was thinking a little bit, it's almost as universal as that if you buy a new car now, they have a little monitor where you can see, you know, yourself backing up, a little TV screen. That's kind of, I think it's standard, maybe it isn't, but I kind of wish I had one. I can barely see driving forward, let alone going back. So I kind of like to have one of those someday. But the things that are becoming standard were not standard 50 years ago. So, like, that's to say that, you really had to deal with cold and heat in a really um, kind of brutal bodily way, even as little as 50 years ago. And some of us had the opportunity to deal with that at Hokyoji. Maybe even worse than people 1,000 years ago. And let me tell you why I think that's true. I don't know if it's true or not. But there was a time when we didn't have any electricity at Hokyoji. And all you couldn't even have a fan. We didn't have fans. And the only warmth we had was a little wood stove, a cheap one that didn't actually function so great. And I'm telling you, did it ever get hot in there on some summer days? And the way I even think it might have been worse, even for us, than it was for people, 100 or 200 or 1,000 years ago, is that when they built a building, they would build it thinking about heat and cold, you know, and they would, let's face facts, people were smart 1,000 years ago, so they're going to build a building where it can be naturally cool. They know how to do that. But we didn't do that with Hokyoji, our building. So it was kind of frustrating when in the evening when it would start to cool down and it'd be 20 degrees cooler outside than in the Zendo because the Zendo just held that heat. And it was quite frustrating. And you'd go back into the Zendo after doing Kinhin outside and just sweat. And same with the cold. Several people got very, very cold. Not in the winter because it was just impossible, but it would be like in the early spring if we did a retreat, like Memorial Day. Sometimes early May can be just brutally cold, or that's the end of May. Yeah, even so, it can be brutally cold. So let's examine this. What the Zen teacher says: when it's cold, cold finishes the monk. When it's hot, heat totals the monk. So I didn't really think about this for the first time until preparing for this talk, but those are kind of opposite things. When he says when it's cold, cold finishes, so finishes. When it's hot, heat totals. So finishes and totals. I don't know Japanese very well, and I don't know nothing about Chinese. But I'm gonna bet that those whatever the Chinese was, they're kind of opposite things. And that's just me speculating. For instance, when we finish something, it's done. It's done. And when something's total, it's kind of like totally full. That's what I think. So in a way, they're kind of opposite. But he's actually saying the same thing. But he's actually, I think, doing it in kind of a crafty manner that we might not get. At least I don't think I got for a long, long time. I'm not sure if I still get it, but anyway. So it just means what happens at that moment when we start to feel cold, and that's why I'm asked you to think about what's the moment, what's it feel like when autumn begins or when spring begins. And what's other terms for spring and autumn that come to mind? I'll throw out a few, like beginning, ending, alive, dying, coming, going. October used to be my favorite month at Hokyoji, but those who live there now know that a pleasant October day is not so pleasant anymore. We've had it was used to be a day, those warm days in autumn get to be like 70 or 72. We should examine in detail the monk's question. When cold or heat comes, how can we avoid it? This is to study the moment when cold comes or the moment when heat comes. This cold or heat, complete cold or complete heat, is cold itself or heat itself. Accordingly, when either comes, it comes from the summit of cold or the summit of heat, and manifests from the eye of cold itself or heat itself. This summit is where there is no cold or heat. This eye is where there is no cold or heat. That might be a little hard to conceptualize, but he's talking about the moment that we actually feel cold or the moment before. What causes us what causes us to think it's really cold? I mean, what happens? So here's a story, an anecdote I'll tell you that I think demonstrates this. Um, Probably it was kind of at the time, it didn't seem like it was a piercing understanding, but I've never forgotten it. So maybe it was. I was having an interview. I think it was like an exit interview with Iko Narazaki Roshi in Japan at the temple, his main temple, Zuoji. And it was starting to get cold in Japan. In Japan, at least every place I went to, they did not have central heating. It was just little heaters here and there. And it doesn't get as cold there as in Minnesota, but it gets cold. Cold, I mean like 48 degrees, you know? That's pretty cold when it's all day long, just never gets higher than 48. You get cold, chilled, to the inside of your bones. And so it was one of those kinds of days, and had my kind of having an interview with him, and I started shivering. Yeah, I was just did a little shiver, and he looked at me and said, "Oh, samui desu ne." like, oh, samui desu ne. That means in Japanese, that means, oh, it's cold, isn't it? You know, and it's like, but he never would have even dreamed of saying that if he didn't see me shivering, because he's like that. I don't know how to explain it, but you just adapt to your circumstances. And he was just so used to it that there wasn't any cold for him, even though I was shivering. I I have to kind of be a little. I've observed this at Hokyoji. Now, adjusting the thermostat in the Zendo. Now we have central. I mean, we have in-floor heating, so it's pretty nice heating. But trying to adjust the thermostat for a group of people is now the most challenging thing. So isn't it strange how our because for some people 68 is freezing in the winter, and then the other thing that's curious to me is I've noticed sometimes in the wintertime people need it to be 74 in the sun, and then in the summertime they need it to be 68. So there's like a zero, there's a minus, whatever that was, 6 degrees of functioning for your human being that you can't function. That's minus 6 degrees. Like in older times, you would have to be able to function when it's 50 degrees or when it's 88 degrees. So you have that range of, oh, okay, within a 30 or 40 degree range, I can manage. But now it's like negative. Anyway, it's something I kind of look at. Anyway, that was a moment for me that, at the time, I really didn't think anything about it. I didn't even think, oh, he's being nice. But it did kind of, I have to admit, it warmed me up when he said, oh, it's cold, isn't it? And he was just kind of doing that to help me along. So, what else does spring and autumn mean? Kind of a rising and a vanishing. So, I see I'm particularly because of a little snag there. I'm down to my last couple of minutes. But I do want to go to the birth and death, or birth and death chapter. It's not life and death, birth and death. And just maybe a couple of lines. Because a Buddha, or an awakened person, is in birth and death, there is no birth and death. I think we can see the similarity between this one and spring and autumn if we reflect a bit. It's also said because a Buddha is not in birth and death, a Buddha is not deluded by birth and death. Now, those seem to be two different statements, but I think they're saying the same thing in two different ways. Because an awakened person is in birth and death, I mean, totally in it. That's where I think this totally or completely finishes, because a person like that is living right in the moment of everything that's arising and vanishing, birth and death. It's all, every moment in our lives, something's arising, something's ending. Every single moment we're alive. Not only just the moment that we call, when a human being is born or a human being dies. So if you're right in that arising and vanishing, you don't see birth and death like as a conceptual thing. You're just in the middle of that. You're right there with it. And then conversely, another teacher said, because an awakened person is not in birth and death, an awakened person is not deluded by birth and death. So that's because an awakened person is not living in that world of, oh, this came, that went, and I'm so sad about that, and that and the other thing. We are not deluded by the coming and going, the passing, and the arising of different events. I'll go on for another few minutes. Those who want to be free from birth and death, in other words, those who want to develop a state of equanimity to live through all these various arising and disappearing events in our life, should understand the meaning of these words. If you search for awakening outside birth and death, it'll be like going to the southern country of UA with your spear headed toward the north. That means something like, be like trying to go to Kansas if you live in Minnesota with the ornament on your hood facing toward Manitoba, something like that. You will cause if you do that, you will cause yourself to remain all the more in birth and death and lose the way of emancipation. Just understand that the arising and passing of all things is itself nirvana. There is nothing such as birth and death to be avoided. There is nothing such as nirvana to be sought. Now that's pretty profound. There's nothing such as nirvana or emancipation to be sought, to seek. And there's nothing. The arising of painful events and of pleasant events and the arising of painful events, the arising of both pleasant and painful events are not to be avoided. And then I'll just close. I've had to cut this a little short from what I would plan, but I'm just going to close with his last paragraph of this fascicle. There's a simple way to become awakened. When you refrain from unwholesome actions, are not attached to the arising and vanishing of events, and are compassionate toward all beings, respectful to seniors and kind to juniors, not excluding or desiring anything, with no designing thoughts or worries, you will be called an awakened person. That's all I have to say for now. Trying to end at the appropriate time. Sorry about that little technical glitch. Don't know why that happened. Well, did anything come up, arise for anyone that they would like to speak about?
So please raise your hand physically or with your Zoom hand, and we can call on you. Okay, Ryushin, please unmute yourself.
First of all, my video is reversed 180 degrees. If I raise, this is my right hand. So this is very disorienting. But I was still taken with Myo-O's talk last week about life and death and cannot say, and then Dokai's talking about life and death and having dreams with all these family members showing up, which is something I talked to Kikon about this week. Is almost every night I have dreams with the people in my family and the people who are close to me. And the remarkable thing to me is that their behavior, their characteristics are true to life. It's my dream. I should be able to control them in ways because it's my dream, but that doesn't happen. They are very much who they were when they were alive. And so originally I thought, well, this is because everything's a construction. Myself is a construction. My version of them is a construction. And that's true. And my construction of them is based on my memories of them, my interactions with them. But I think there's something more to it. I think there's a quality. If I immediately think of any of those people, there's a quality to that person that that is manifest in all these behaviors and characteristics. And so it is funny in times in certain dreams that I don't get the cooperation I would really like because they're true to life. They're true to who they were, which is, and then when I wake up, I think, well, I have my construction. I have myself. Am I true to life? True to life in a different way. So, and as far as spring goes, my yard is full of plants and they are all popping up. They all have their sequence. They all have their patience. It's just a remarkable thing to see this time of year, how things are just coming up. There's peonies come up and they're just this candy red color when they first shoot up through the ground. And wild ginger is this kind of really soft kind of mint color before they spread their leaves. And they're not, the thing that gets me is they're very, very patient about going forward. They're not like eager to move ahead, but they're being assertive. They're moving ahead. So that's what I have.
Tim Messagic.
Yes. Okay, so yes, what words came to mind when thinking of spring and fall? And the kind of obvious ones are birth and death. What first came to mind for me was preparation and preparation. With our garden, there's so many things you're trying to get done in the spring in a certain amount of time, get the cold weather vegetables in, and in the fall, trying to get things prepared for winter. One of the things that came to mind is trying to get the garden plowed in the spring before you can plant. But in the fall, when you've had a bug problem, it's important to get the garden plowed also, so that you don't have the bug problem hopefully as bad the following year. And maybe there's in life in the summer is maybe a little more relaxing. I don't know. It seems like there's always stuff to do in the summer, but when it comes to raising small children, there's so much work. And when it comes to the elderly, as you're discovering on your extra long stay, there can be so much work. It seems in that way, birth and death are very much the same. That's all I had.
John? You're muted.
In terms of springtime, I mean, it's, for me, it's open arms, welcoming the warmth, welcoming what's about to occur, looking forward to all sorts of wonderful things. Fall is just the opposite. I want to push it away, so to speak. I mean, part of fall is, the trees changing and that sort of thing, which is lovely. It's wonderful. But on the other hand, the dark days are coming, and November, December, January. And the older I get, the less, I don't know, that I tolerate the cold and the darkness, so to speak. And I'm sure there's part of me that has seasonal defective disorder, or whatever it's called, that, in terms of light, what light does to your body and your brain kind of thing, I kind of recognize part of that. So being in Minnesota for the last 60 years and being in my 70s, try to escape Minnesota for about 10 or 15 days in the wintertime just to get warm and to see the sun again. So trying to get that open arm feeling by leaving my place and going to a new country or a new state to feel warmer. So that's just some thoughts of what happens to me and what I think about. Thank you.
Mary?
Thanks everybody. Thanks Dokai, and thanks everybody for your comments. I really enjoy listening to comments. So what really resonated with me with Dokai's Dharma talk was heat and cold. And what came up for me right away was having been in the boundary waters with a group of 5 women, 5 of us total, having taken about 16 trips over the years into the boundary waters. Always in July, very much planned for in July, because July means maximal heat during the day, even though it's always dicey going in. Portaging into maybe 2 or 3 lakes, making sure to get away from the non-motorized lakes, but going in 2 or 3 lakes and making the trip circle around with 3 nights in and 4 days total. So paddling in, coming out. But the cold and heat is always something that is thought about before a trip. One has to bring gloves, hats, layers, but you're packing a backpack. So you can't be bringing all your stuff. Everything's got to be right in a little tight knapsack, so it can be stuffed into a pack so that we can, on portages, not carry too much stuff. But the thing that I want to say is the cold is okay, but once the rain hits and the wind, what happens to the group is that the group, your attention pretty much turns to, it definitely turns to the person who is suffering the most, the person who is the most cold, the person maybe whose waterproof jacket maybe isn't doing so well that year, and they've had the jacket and they brought it along and it's not really waterproof anymore. So the group has to come together to protect and make sure that we each don't become too chilled, too cold, ill, and that is really living in the present. It's always a possibility that the weather could turn. And then we really need to take care of each other and get the tarp up, try to get a fire, get some hot water going to keep us warm. And anyway, and we've done it. Sometimes it's dicey. But that's my hot and cold story. Thank you for listening.
You know,
Yeah.
Right. I was trying to just because now it's spring, and I've been just trying to like, what is that? That arises in the body before all the I conceptualize about spring like, oh, it's beautiful, it's warm, all those good things, but like this pleasure. So that's okay if I know it, but then there's this kind of it's natural, like I want pleasant feelings, so not that we shouldn't have pleasant feelings, I'm not saying that, but just and this sort of immediate, like, it's just going to go on pleasantly, so I'm going to get a break. You know what I mean? It's just this natural way, I think. I don't think I'm the only one. So that's what I thought about. It's like spring. It's like I'm going to have a break from something I didn't like as much, too. And then autumn, for me, autumn's like relief, kind of like. So kind of the same thing, only going the other direction, going to Minnesota instead of Kansas. So that's kind of like what the experience. And then there's more things that come along with heat and cold. I mean, you guys know me. I'm sitting there with my brown blanket and my black blanket. In the Zendo, I've had the same blankets for 30 years. Oh, that's me. Oh, see, there's the brown blanket and the black blanket. But you know what I want to know is I've taken a bunch of classes on whiteness, white supremacy, yada, 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 yada. And I'm just wondering how this teaching works with that training. Maybe someone here has some wisdom about that. Because one thing I'm noticing that seems like it's not happening for me in that training is just this. It feels like it's a lot about compassion and samsara and all these unconscious, stupid things we've all been conditioned by. But where is this in that training? I've been really wondering about it, and I don't know how to put them together. So maybe somebody has something to say. That would be awesome. I need help.
Dokai-san.
yeah, I think he speaks to it. I mean, he doesn't speak to it in terms of race, but he does say, refrain from unwholesome actions and be compassionate toward all beings. And he says, respectful to seniors and kind to juniors. So to me, even though it's not specifically, mentioning race, and I don't see why he would, coming from his culture. But for me, that when I, particularly when I read it again this time, it just means people who we think are different from us. That's what juniors or seniors. Juniors are like people younger. Seniors are people older. But it's not. It doesn't say be kind to different people of different races or things and abstain from unwholesome actions too. So it's kind of a practical guide, I think. And like I say, for me, it just means, a junior might be someone who you would look down on or mistreat, and a senior is someone who you might, think is higher than you. But it's just try to be present with every human being you meet, um, and compassionate. So in some ways, I think that is speaking to that. Maybe not as directly as we probably need to do in our day and time, but I think that's at the bottom line. But thank you.
Kikan.
Thank you. So, getting back to spring and summer, what comes up, or not spring and summer, spring and fall. What comes up for me is I kind of associate spring and fall with the emotions of joy and sadness to some extent. Like in spring, things are coming alive and coming awake, and whereas in fall, it's kind of entering a more quiescent period. So I don't know. Something I'm thinking about there is how to uh, be present with those emotions as they come up and be respectful to them. It could kind of be kind of like the junior and senior thing. You could think of spring as a junior, someone who's new, or you can think of fall as someone who's has more wisdom, or you could turn it around. I don't know. I was just reading in the New York Times this morning a story about how a lot of the younger people are excited about potentially excited, or in some cases trepidatious about the possibility of the roaring 2020s here, because in some senses we've been in a quiescent, one might say sad period for more than the last year. At least it seemed that way for me. Um, and I have really mixed feelings about reading this article. It's like there's a lot of spring energy to it, and I'm kind of like, oh, okay, settle down there. So, but at the same time, it kind of sounds like fun too. So that's just something I'm reflecting on, is not thinking of joy as like good, or spring as good, and fall or sadness as kind of a downer. They both kind of have their role in the coming and going of life. That's kind of my feeling about it at the moment. Thank you.
Gotta unmute myself. I think oftentimes of spring as kind of refreshment and reemergence, and you know, and we've used the word rebirth, and everything's so green and new and fresh. And as we go along to autumn, things are less bright, and they, until in Minnesota, of course, and like looking at a maple tree. A maple tree is exquisite in the autumn. There's oranges and reds and there's a different kind of vibrancy before the leaves fall and fade. And I mean, I guess thinking of going towards extinction or in some way, but that there's still something so vibrant in the fresh green and the brilliant oranges and reds of before fading away. That's what I gotta say. Okay, Carl?
Right. Well, all this talk about spring and autumn has reminded me about when I lived in Miami for 7 years and everything was reversed. Springtime was leading into the oppressively, consistently hot and humid summer days. We had a thing in Miami that the bank thermometers would stop at 99 degrees. They never went to 100 degrees, and we always considered it a conspiracy. I mean, regardless of how hot it was, the banks, their thermometers always showed 99. Never hit 100 in Miami ever, officially. So, the other thing that happened there was I missed winter. I mean, the bugs never went away. And it was kind of, warm, cool. But I enjoyed getting back to Minnesota where there actually was a change in the seasons. And you could see that. But it just struck me as to, you live in a different latitude and the change in seasons is quite a different thing. So anyway, that's all. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, that's something to consider. I'm not sure. Yeah, I guess in South America they call winter the time when our summer begins. But in any event, yeah, those are kind of interesting concepts. Dogen grew up and lived at a similar latitude as Minnesotans, so he had this. He probably didn't even know places like Miami existed. So anyway, we're getting down to our last 2 minutes, so I think I'll just close with something I was going to get into a little bit, but because of our little blackout or my blackout or whatever, couldn't get to. I'd like to ask you to consider what is birth and what is death? I mean, actually, and does it really exist? Of course, I know when, particularly, when parents have a new baby, they're thrilled with happiness and joy on most occasions. And when we lose someone we love, we're filled with great sorrow and death. So I'm not going to deny their existence. However, I'd like to ask you to consider perhaps birth and death are human concepts of certain events that are changing rapidly on our time scale. In other words, certainly a baby isn't born when it comes out of the mother's body. Something was going on before then. But there's a lot of big changes that are happening very fast. So we say, oh, birth just happened. But so many things were going on before that, conditions changing, and even more conditions in the conception of animals and humans. The moment of conception, as far as I understand, is extremely profound change happening very, very quickly. It just puts a cascade of events going on so there's just change. I'll just call it change right now. And probably several, if not many of you have heard my story about when I was a cook at MZMC, I would make brownies from scratch to serve every Saturday morning. It was kind of a relief because I could go cook in the kitchen and not have to listen to Hojo-san's talks because I had heard so many of them that at least at that time it kind of gave me a really relief that I didn't have to listen anymore and I could just make brownies and that was more fun. But anyway, when I started doing this, I started to look at okay, when does something become a brownie? Because I made them from scratch. So you got I can't remember all the ingredients, but of course there's flour, oil, cocoa, chocolate chips, you know, on and on. And so they're all sitting there out in the counter. You start mixing them together, and you say, oh, "It's not a brownie yet." You know? So you put them together and you stir them all up, and eggs, So you start, and now they're all wet and liquidy, and you say, "No, it's not a brownie yet. It's not what we call a brownie." So then you put them in the oven. At what point do they become a non-brownie and they become a brownie? so anyway, so I kind of translated that into human life. Uh, I mean, you think about that. That's your koan for the next. Okay, I'm done. Maybe we could
Okay.
do our medication.
Okay, so I have a few announcements. So next Sunday, April 25th, Reverend Kikan Mike Howard, who's with us, will be giving a talk entitled The Katagiri Transcripts. So please join us if you'd like. You can see the full lineup of speakers for the next month on our website at hokyoji.org. Please also connect with us on Facebook. Video of the Sunday talks will be available on our website and on our YouTube page. And you can also find a lot of other past talks by many teachers in those places. Another way, I think probably most of us here, you can stay in touch with Hokyoji is to sign up for our email list and receive our newsletter and other announcements. I also would like to announce, and somebody used the word prepare for springtime. And so the next couple of weekends at Hokyoji, we will be preparing for the coming season. And so next weekend, there's a work weekend, which begins on Friday evening and ends midday Sunday. And then the weekend after that, I believe it's April 30th to May 2nd, there's a Caring for the Land weekend. And so the work weekend might be preparing more of the facilities and the campus of Hokyoji for the coming season. And Caring for the Land, we go a bit more out into the natural environment of Hokyoji and work on that. And so if you're interested, please register for those. There's no fee, but in terms of knowing how many people to prepare for, particularly in terms of food, that would be great. And because a lot of the activities will be outside, there's no particular COVID limits for how many people will be coming. That when we're on inside spaces, I believe, particularly in the Zendo, will be masked, and there might be a limit to how many people can come in the Zendo at a time. What's that? Okay, and let's see. Does anyone else have any announcements? Mira? Oh,
I just have a question because I'm coming to the work weekend, and should I bring my robes or what do I need to bring?
Dokai-san, what do you think of that?
I don't think it's necessary. Priest could just bring Roxas.
Any other questions or announcements? Okay, so then we are going to end with the closing chant, and I'm sorry I can't figure out how to put it on the chat when I'm the host while I'm recording, so please forgive me. So hopefully you all know. So, beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Thank you, Dokai-san, for a wonderful talk. And thanks to everyone who came. And look forward to seeing you again next week. And perhaps some of you will see in person at Hokyoji. So have a good week. Be well.
Thank you.
Bye.